here on each side. Parietal lobe, sides of the cerebrum. The temporal lobe, kind of stuck a little bit down underneath here. And the occipital lobe, which is the back portion of the cerebrum back here, beneath the occipital bone.
I'm sure to show the camera.
There's also a central fissure, which is a little difficult to see on a sheep's brain, especially which is pretty remarkable on a human brain, but on a sheep's brain,
you guys, if you notice the surface of your cerebrum,
but basically it's a dividing line between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. I think on this brain, our
parts that pop out are known as a gyrus.
Not as deep as the other fissures.
Okay. However, the little tiny grooves between one gyrus and another, this little groove here is known
Addition
as
from
a
the outside, we can see the pons and medulla. I'm going to flip the brain over here so we can see those structures on the lower portion here. Looking at an inferior view of the sheep's brain right now. The pons actually at this moment is partially covered by this flap of tissue right here. The blue enlargements right here. You see the region of the pons. And just behind it, this other enlargement area right here until it turns into the spinal cord and continues on out. This region will be the medulla oblongata.
So that's the pons? Pons, and this is medulla oblongata.
Okay, having located those external structures, we're now going to look at the internal structures. We're going to take a sagittal section, so you're going to cut your sheep's brain right down through the great longitudinal fissure. You're going to continue your incision right through the cerebellum and down through the spinal cord so that we fold the brain open into two halves. When you make this cut, you want to do it with a minimum amount of back and forth sawing that you can possibly do. Try to make the cut just a nice, sharp, smooth cut, one single cut if you possibly can. I've got a brain here that we have already open, and we'll take a look at the insides of this. So we're looking at the inferior view right now. Let's turn it back over to the superior view. It'll fall in half like this when you've made your cut. Okay, looking at the half here, we can see that on the inside of the cerebellum, here's the cerebellum in the sagittal section, we can see that there's two kinds of material in the cerebellum. There's this darker outer gray matter, and then there's a branched pattern of white matter. The branching pattern of the white matter is called the arbor vitae. It means tree of life. The branching tree-like pattern. If we look more up into the regions of the cerebrum here, I'm actually going to switch halves on us here. This one might show better what I want to look at here. There are cavities in the cerebrum, in the brain. One of the cavities would be right here in this half. As I open up this opening, this is called the lateral ventricle. There are two lateral ventricles, so there's one in this hemisphere of the cerebrum. There's also one in the other hemisphere. The third ventricle then would be a region below this, which if I pull this apart a little bit in here, we can see some of this brownish material is actually within that other ventricle. So there's another cavity or another space right there where the probe is running. We've actually sectioned through the third ventricle, right through the center of it. So we have half of it in this hemisphere and the other half of it's over there. So it actually comes down and actually surrounds this entire region. This large structure here passes right through the center of that third ventricle. So if we keep following on down this direction, we'll come to the fourth ventricle. And the fourth ventricle is along this little channel right here. And as it turns into the cerebellum rather here, there's a little opening. And that other opening right in there, that extra little channel into there, would be the fourth ventricle. Okay, going back up here, we'll look at the corpus callosum. I'm going to switch this back again. Look at this one a little better here. Here's the corpus callosum. It's a band of white matter. It's a white matter fiber tract that connects between the two hemispheres. So we can see it on both halves. It just happens to be a little more defined on this particular.
So find that lateral ventricle is that white band on top, superior to.
Extending off from the back end of the corpus callosum, and coming forward a little tongue sort of. I'm going to open up the ventricle on this side so we can see where we're at.
And so she switched halves. It was actually better on that half she was showing.
A little there behind this membrane. This shows it quite well, actually. Here's the corpus callosum. And then this white projection coming down here will be the fornix. And the lateral ventricle would be up inside there.
Corpus callosum. And this part right here is the fornix.
We have an aqueductus sylvius, which connects from the third ventricle, this area down here, down to the fourth ventricle. It runs from out of the third ventricle behind this large lump right here. We'll name that in just a minute. comes straight down to
Another
here.
structure that's
and
not
this
mentioned,
passageway.
if you guys
That's
look
the
at
fourth
your
ventricle. The entire passageway is
sagittal
called
cut,
the aqueduct of
towards the
Celeus, or
surface of the
cerebral
brain,
aqueduct.
it's a little bit of a darker matter. This is white.
Next to
It's
third
this
and fourth
darker
ventricle.
matter here. Okay, it's called the cerebral
Mammillary
cortex.
body is a structure which we can see from the outside as well. I'll go back and show you that on the outside view, but we can see it internally here as a structure that's been sectioned in half right there.
So that was the mammillary body.
When we review through the cranial nerves on the outside, I'll show you again where it is on the outside. You can compare that location to the inside location for the mammillary
The
body.
little poles.
The pineal body is quite a bit larger in a sheep than it is in humans relative to the proportional size of the
Mammillary
brain. It's this other round structure right
Pineal
here.
body. Mammillary.
On half of it, we slice through it by making a sagittal section.
Can't see it.
Corpora quadrigemina, it actually means it's four bodies. There are four structures that make up the corpora quadrigemina. There are two superior colliculi and two inferior colliculi. From the interior view, what you do is you fold the brain open a little bit like so that you can look at this region between,
Take your brains,
hold this here just a minute,
okay, fold
Between
the
the
halves
cerebrum.
back to make a whole brain again.
and the cerebellum.
Take your hands and try to separate, okay, the cerebrum from the cerebellum.
So
Okay, now
in there right now,
kind of bend it like this.
we have a superior colliculus,
Take
this
it
large
together.
rounded body here,
Two hands.
and an inferior colliculus, this smaller body
Two hands,
right
guys,
here.
and you're gonna bend it open. Looks like someone's mooning you. Looks like a butt.
I'm going to turn the brain back around so that we're looking at it as we were in the sagittal
Okay,
section. You
there's
can see
four
where
of
those
them.
things are.
Okay, that's called the corpora
This
quadrigemina.
would be the superior colliculus up here, and the inferior colliculus down there.
What is that?
That is one half of the corpora quadrigemina. The total corpora quadrigemina requires two superior colliculi, one from each side, so we need the whole brain together. Actually, I think what I'll do is I'll take this other one
So
that is
take
still
this,
intact,
do exactly
fold
what
it
you
open, and let you see the whole corpora quadrigemina.
Here's the cerebrum,
Two
here's the
superior
cerebellum. Bend it.
colliculi, two inferior colliculi,
Two
making up
superior
the corpora
colliculi,
quadrigemina.
two inferior colliculi. So it's really the
Okay,
superior ones.
back to our sagittal section here. Each brain has a couple structures that we'll look at first here.
Yeah.
This half. This may be very difficult for me to show on the camera. We'll do the best we can. There are a couple of very tiny structures that you need to be able to locate. The first one is called the anterior commissure. It's right there on the sheep's brain. All it is a little teeny tiny small dot of white tissue. It's a tract, so it's a place where this half of the cerebrum is being connected to the other half. And there's just a small white dot. If you saw it a lot in making your sagittal section, you'll probably lose it. But if you have a good straight section, you can probably locate
Pointing
it.
at a
It's
commissioner
right kind
that's
of
not
down
in
here,
your
as the
iPad.
point comes down, you find it right down there at the tip of the point. That's the anterior commissure. There's also a posterior commissure. If you follow more or less straight back from that up into this region, there's a posterior commissure right in here. Another little small dot of white tissue.
Somewhere right here.
Between the anterior commissure and the posterior commissure is this very large mass. This is called the thalamus. So this is a portion of the thalamus.
Thalamus?
Actually, the thalamus continues back down into the hemisphere there, but this large portion right here would be the thalamus. Hypothalamus, hypo means below, so when we look for the hypothalamus, below the thalamus. It's this region right in here, between this enlargement here and this mammillary body back here, which we identified previously. This other area, kind of grayish in here, would be the hypothalamus.
I don't see it. Do you see it?
The pituitary gland is not on this particular brain. It's been removed so
some
you
of
can
yours
make the
have
sagittal
pituitary
section
glands, some don't.
easily.
You gotta
If
flip
your
the brain
pituitary
upside down.
gland is still in place, it'll be a large structure. It'll be
You
right
got that
about
little
here,
flappy thing on there?
hanging off the undersurface.
Get a little
I do have a
flappy thing.
pituitary gland still in place on this one, and that's why I saved this one.
Do not pull it
With
off.
the membrane still intact around it on the inferior view, this is this large
Well,
structure
you're
right
gonna see
here.
something right here.
The pituitary gland. In order to see the cranial nerve, which is going to be our next step, we're going to have to remove this entire piece of membrane along with the pituitary gland so that we can get down and look at those cranial nerves. If you haven't done that already, then you'll need to do that. But you'll need to be very careful in the way that you remove this membrane to preserve any small white fibers you can possibly see on this brain. For example, right here, are two small cranial nerves. This happens to be cranial nerve pair number 6, the abducens nerve. And you can see that this is anchored to this membrane. There'll be actually several pairs of nerves that are anchored to the membrane. You have to locate those first. And be very careful to clip them away from the membrane before you remove them so that you don't lose the nerves at the same time. They're small and they're fragile.
Pituitary gland.
Okay, the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to move.
So we're going to move on. She's going to be talking about a brain model. Again, we don't have a brain model, so she's going to talk about this, and then after that she's going to do the cranial nerves, okay? So be prepped for the different cranial nerves that we're about to talk about.
I guess you stopped it.
This is on the next page.
Push it.